It was a typical day in the courtroom, or so it seemed. But behind the heavy doors, something dark was about to unfold, something that would shatter the public's perception of justice. The scene begins with a racist cop who thought he could get away with anything. He stood there in front of the judge, arrogant and confident, as though he held all the power. What he didn't know, however, was that the woman he thought was just another lawyer was far more than that. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the case went on. The cop, his history of discrimination known to few, had a plan to avoid accountability. But as the case progressed, it became clear that the woman wasn't who she appeared to be. The moment she spoke, the cop's smug grin faded, replaced by uncertainty. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was the judge. In an instant, everything changed. The cop, now realizing the gravity of his mistake, tried to salvage the situation, but his desperation was evident. What would happen when this racist cop realized his actions would now be judged by the very person he had tried to undermine? With the stakes higher than ever, the tension built in the courtroom. Would the cop face the consequences of his actions, or was he about to manipulate the system again? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. The courtroom fell silent as the realization hit the officer. He had thought he could control the situation, manipulate the system like he always had. After all, he was a seasoned cop. His reputation preceded him. He'd been involved in countless arrests, some questionable, some outright corrupt, but always managed to slip through the cracks. The public saw him as a hero. The woman before him, however, saw him for who he truly was. The judge, a calm but intense woman in her mid-40s, had been quietly observing the entire exchange. She was no stranger to the weight of the law. In fact, she had dedicated her career to bringing fairness and justice to a system that often failed the very people it was meant to protect. Her name was Judge Maya Carter, a woman of both intellect and strength, known for her no-nonsense approach to the law. But what few knew was that she had been tracking the officer's career for months, investigating the rising cases of police misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of power in her city. Maya had been aware of the cop's past long before today. In fact, his actions had pushed her to take a more personal interest in the case. But sitting here, in front of him, she realized how far he was willing to go to protect himself. The officer's face twisted with panic as she began reading his charges aloud, each one more damning than the last. The more she spoke, the more desperate he became, his earlier arrogance dissolving into sheer fear. What would she do next? Would she let him escape again, or was it finally time to hold him accountable? The air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with tension as Judge Maya Carter's voice echoed across the room. She spoke with authority, but there was a quiet resolve in her tone, a determination that had been building for years. She wasn't just going after one corrupt cop, she was fighting an entire system that had failed to deliver real justice. As the officer stood there, visibly shaking, his eyes darted from the judge to the door, as if searching for an escape he knew he wouldn't find. Maya wasn't alone in her pursuit. In the back of the courtroom, her assistant Ella watched nervously. Ella had worked for Maya for the past 3 years, and she knew how personal this case was for her. She had witnessed the judge's quiet frustration, the late nights spent poring over case files, the phone calls with victims and families of those who had been failed by the justice system. This case wasn't just about one man. It was about the broader issue of racial injustice, police brutality, and the hidden power dynamics that ran deep in the city. Ella couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if Maya's plan didn't work? The officer had connections, powerful ones. He wasn't just any cop. He was part of a network that stretched into the higher echelons of the city's law enforcement. Maya had known this from the start, but now, with the stakes higher than ever, she had no choice but to expose it all. If she went too far, would she become the target? The officer's face was now an open book of fear, but his pride kept him from pleading outright. Instead, he tried to regain his composure, shifting his stance and throwing out a defiant challenge. "You can't prove anything," he spat, his voice shaking but filled with venom. You think you're the first one to try and take me down. I've got friends in high places. You'll regret this. Maya's gaze hardened. She had heard these threats before, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just about one officer's wrongdoings anymore. It was about taking down the entire corrupt network he was a part of. But she knew it was a risk. If she moved too fast, if she exposed too much, she could find herself in a battle she wasn't prepared for. The court murmured as tension simmered in the air. Outside, protesters had gathered, demanding justice for victims of police violence, and Maya knew their eyes were on her. This wasn't just about one trial. It was a fight for the soul of the justice system itself. But even as the officer continued to challenge her, Maya's mind raced through every possible outcome. Ella watched with bated breath, sensing her boss's internal struggle. Could Maya really bring this cop to justice? Or would she risk losing everything? Her career, her reputation, maybe even her life? The officer's smirk grew wider as he sensed her hesitation. It was like a game to him. Would Maya fold under the pressure? Or would she become the one thing he feared most, a force capable of taking him down? As the moments dragged on, the courtroom became a battleground, not just for justice, but for something deeper. The balance of power was shifting, and the outcome remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just a trial. This was the beginning of something far bigger. The courtroom was eerily still, the kind of silence that swallowed everything around it. Even the usual hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish, leaving behind only the sound of Maya's steady breath. She locked eyes with the officer, his challenge still hanging in the air. The smugness was fading, but a dangerous arrogance remained. The kind of arrogance that only comes when someone has too much to lose and too much to hide. Maya's grip on the gavel tightened, her knuckles whitening. She knew that if she made the wrong move now, if she misstepped, the entire system would turn on her. The officer had friends in high places, and the reach of his network stretched beyond what most could imagine. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about dismantling an entire operation, a structure built on corruption and fear. Ella, standing at the back of the courtroom, felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had always known Maya was a force to be reckoned with, but she had never seen her like this, calm, but with a cold fire burning in her eyes. The kind of fire that came from knowing what was at stake. But Ella wasn't sure Maya fully understood how deep the danger went. She had seen the warning signs. Anonymous calls, strange vehicles parked outside their office, and just last week, an unsettling accident involving Maya's car. It all pointed to something far more sinister than just a courtroom battle. The officer, sensing the shift in the room, began to grow more desperate. His fists clenched at his sides, and he took a step forward. "You think you can break me, huh?" His voice trembled with something darker now, as if he wasn't just angry, he was scared. "You have no idea who you're messing with. You really want to ruin your career, your life." Maya remained unmoved, her face a mask of composure, but inside, her mind raced. She'd heard these threats before, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just an officer trying to protect himself. This was a man who knew the walls were closing in, who was willing to do anything to escape the inevitable. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. The clock was ticking. The more he resisted, the more she knew she was getting closer to the truth, but the stakes were rising. As she glanced down at the folder of evidence in front of her, she knew there was more to this case than even she had uncovered. There were whispers in the documents, code words, hidden connections, and she could feel it deep down. If she pushed too hard, she risked not just her career, but her very safety. Outside the courtroom, the protesters grew louder. The crowd was restless, chanting for justice, for accountability. They had been watching this trial closely, and they wanted results. The pressure was mounting on all sides. But what would happen if Maya was forced to make a decision too soon? Would she take the risk of exposing everything, knowing it could backfire? Ella, unable to sit still any longer, stepped toward the door of the courtroom. She had seen enough of this officer's games to know he wasn't bluffing. The closer Maya got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. But it was too late to back out now. The line had been crossed. Just as Maya's hand hovered above the gavel, ready to strike the final blow in the courtroom, the door to the back of the room slammed open. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh light of the hallway. For a moment, everyone froze, every eye in the room locked onto the newcomer, a strange tension cutting through the already electric atmosphere. The officer's smirk faltered, his eyes darting toward the door, his body stiffening. Maya's eyes narrowed, instantly sensing that something had shifted. She had been so focused on the officer, so determined to bring him to justice, that she hadn't expected anyone to intervene, not like this. The figure stepped forward, revealing a tall man in a dark suit. His face was unfamiliar, but his air of authority was undeniable. He walked straight toward the judge, his presence demanding attention. "Judge Carter," the man said, his voice smooth, but laced with an undertone of warning. "I think we need to reconsider how we're handling this matter." Maya's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. "And you are?" The man didn't flinch. "Assistant District Attorney Brian Hayes. I've been assigned to oversee this case from here on out." The room seemed to shift, a murmur running through the spectators. "Assistant District Attorney?" Maya's stomach dropped. This was exactly what she had feared. The deep ties, the powerful allies this officer had within the system. Hayes was no stranger to her. He had been a rising star in the DA's office, known for his political savvy and connections to law enforcement. But what was he doing here now? Before Maya could respond, Hayes turned to the officer, his eyes flashing with a brief, almost imperceptible nod. The officer's shoulders relaxed slightly, but he still wore a mask of anger. It was clear that Hayes wasn't just any prosecutor. He was working with the officer, shielding him from something much bigger than just a trial. Maya's mind raced. Was this a setup? Had the officer's powerful friends managed to plant someone in the DA's office to control the outcome of the case? She felt the walls closing in. Hayes was too close, too confident. This wasn't just about protecting one officer. It was about protecting an entire network of corruption. "I'm sorry, Judge," Hayes continued smoothly, his eyes locked with hers. "But this case is being re-evaluated. We need to hold off on any further proceedings until we've had a chance to review the evidence again. We don't want to rush things, do we?" The words felt like a threat wrapped in politeness. Maya's gaze flicked to Ella in the back of the courtroom, her assistant's face pale, her eyes wide. Ella knew what Maya knew. This wasn't just a simple interruption. This was a power play. Hayes was here to control the narrative, to bury the truth before it could come to light. Maya knew she couldn't let this go. She couldn't back down now, not when so much was on the line. The protests outside had grown louder, their chants for justice echoing in the background, fueling her resolve. She had one chance to break the system open, but Hayes was playing his hand, and it was a strong one. The gavel in her hand felt heavier than ever, and as the room waited for her decision, Maya realized she was facing something much bigger than a corrupt cop. She was up against an entire network, a web of deceit and manipulation that reached further than she could have ever imagined. And now, with Hayes making his move, it was clear, if she didn't act fast, she might not be the one holding the gavel for much longer. The stakes had just been raised to a level Maya wasn't prepared for. The real battle was only beginning, and she had no idea just how far this would go. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Maya's eyes locked with Assistant District Attorney Brian Hayes, her mind racing. He had just thrown down the gauntlet, his words clear. Slow down the case, reevaluate everything, bury the truth. But Maya couldn't afford to back down, not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. She had come too far, and the stakes were higher than ever. She gripped the gavel tighter, her pulse quickening, as she felt the weight of the room bearing down on her. The officer's eyes gleamed, waiting for Hayes to take control, but there was a flicker of doubt in his expression now. He could feel the shift, the unraveling of his carefully constructed world. The room was still, Save for the murmurs of the crowd outside, their voices a distant reminder of why this fight mattered. Maya took a deep breath and slammed the gavel down with force, cutting through the silence. "This trial continues," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "We will not delay. Justice will not be silenced by fear or politics."